Hello everyone, I'm Joel Baird, the General Manager of Missoula Community Access Television, inviting you to learn more about the fall City Council candidate elections. We've asked all the candidates for office to come to the MCAT studio for a little quieter, more intimate head and shoulders exchange of ideas about their campaigns and hopes for the future. To that end, Bob Campbell is here. He is a candidate for Ward 5. Bob, welcome. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Joel. Appreciate it.
You're
Thank you very
much.
much.
So as you know, everyone's asked the same questions, but answers, golly, they could be different. So here's your first question. What motivated you to seek this office?
So Joel, it comes back from just I'm looking at over 30 years experience in the public sector. I started back in early 90s in land use planning. I moved up to Montana in 1993, so I guess I'm still relative newcomer.
Yeah,
some of the crowd just 30 years in. So relative newcomer, and I started employment with Gallatin County over in Bozeman as a land use planner. That entailed subdivision review, entailed floodplain management. I worked with DNRC to actually redo a floodplain map of the East Gallatin fork of the East Gallatin River during my time in Bozeman, as well as just everyday subdivision review, zoning requests, conditional use permits and such. And that was my line of work for altogether up to 5 years.
Yeah.
And then in 95, I always had this voice in the back of my head, law enforcement. And I had some friends that I knew down in California that had gotten into law enforcement, and just this calling I had. So I decided late 95 to act on that voice. I finished my work up with Gallatin County. I decided to put myself through the Montana Law Enforcement Academy in 95. Yeah. And at that point it was in Bozeman, so it was pretty convenient for me, but nevertheless, I had to pay my own tuition and whatnot. So I put myself through Law Enforcement Academy in 95, and in 96, I landed my first law enforcement job all the way at the top, so to speak, as Chief of Police up in Hot Springs.
Oh my gosh.
In Sanders County. Yeah. Population 444, but it was a great experience. It really got me engaged in a small community feel that I didn't really have in Bozeman or elsewhere I worked. Yeah. So very, very unique experience, and I enjoyed that for just short of a year before a position opened up down in Plains, about a half hour south of same county. Worked with the chief down there for roughly 3 years. Met my first wife there in Plains, and she's originally from Missoula, and she had just moved from State back to Montana. She was grown and raised here in Missoula, and we ended up getting married. And we decided at that point that we wanted to make a move to come back for her sake to the Missoula community. And so in 99, I ended up applying for and getting hired as a police officer here at the Missoula Police Department.
Oh my gosh,
and, yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I put 23 years in altogether with the Missoula Police Department, just retiring last December after 23 years as a sergeant with the department.
Congratulations on your retirement.
I appreciate that.
Sounds very well deserved.
Yeah, it was, so 21 of those years actually were on the street and patrol quite a bit of time. You see, the best of what Missoula has to offer in terms of community support, but you get to see that underbelly that, is out there. We have to deal with it, and, we're out there, to make community a much better, safer place for everyone that visits, everyone that resides here. And, I take, great pride in the fact that, I was able to do my little bit part over those 23 years to help provide that. And then, of course, I'd be remiss without saying I'm also a veteran of the Montana Army National Guard and Army Reserve. I did 21 years altogether, enlisted when I was in high school in '84 and got out in 2005. And I retired as a sergeant first class. So I reflect on the public service that I provided, both locally and federal level with the Army, and just thought there's some way that I could continue forth in this. And I end up reaching out to Councilman John Contos at the time, Councilman Jesse Ramos at the time, and spoke with them about how I feel I could carry my public service forward. And I look to do that now, running for city council here in Missoula.
Great. Okay, and then let's imagine you got elected. What are your top 3 priorities, once you're in office?
So certainly one of the first priorities that comes to mind, I get this when I knock on doors and talk to people and stuff, it's the rise in property taxes. I mean, first and foremost, and it affects the property owners here in town, it affects renters here in town. My own son, he's off in the Army himself now on active duty, but for a time he had to rent an apartment here in Missoula. Pretty tough, and then after a year renegotiating a contract for a $300 a month rent increase. So I feel the pain, I feel the burden. I look at my own mortgage rates. I'm on a 30-year fixed. Yeah, my mortgage went up close to 23% this last January. It's tough on homeowners, and it makes it tough on renters in that way. And I just think, my main priority is getting in is putting priorities to our budget, and you hear a lot lately this concept of, needs versus wants. And, I think there are certain things that we consider needs. Certainly emergency services, of course, near and dear to my heart, is a necessity. We could debate, to what level, and, different people have different ideas about emergency services, but it's definitely a need, can't do without it. Infrastructure, or roads, or sewers, or water, it has to be maintained. I mean, it's a need, it's a necessity. And also I have that housing. Housing is a need, and certainly, I think we're going to get into this more as we progress in the interview, but housing, the vacancy rates are just so low right now, and the cost of housing compared to the area median income is just so much disparity. I mean, it's in a tough spot, but it's those property taxes first and foremost that we need to address. We need to look at what our priorities are, and we need to look at the programs that are not a universal need across the board for every person that lives or visits here in town, and make some tough decisions. I think it was Mike Nugent, Councilman Nugent, said during the budget meeting just a week or so ago when they approved the final budget. I mean, he said, look, I think it's going to be wishful thinking to look at the state to solve our tax problems here. I know Mayor Hess brought up, the inequity that's there between, commercial taxes versus residential tax, and how that's grown over the years. And I mean, that's a fact. I mean, I believe the numbers.
They had mentioned the technology and tourism, where they love to capture,
some
and
of that.
They feel hamstrung by enacting local option taxes by the state. So they want the state to say, go ahead and do your local option tax.
That's right. That is correct. And I think Mike, he's pretty pessimistic on one hand, though, with what we have at the state legislature for any kind of, widespread, meaningful change. There might be a tweak here and there, maybe the next session, but we're going to have to make some tough choices with our budget. ARPA money is running out. I think they're using the last little bit, scraping the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, to pay for the Johnson Street shelter.
People watching, the ARPA money is
American Rescue Plan Act. Thank you for
something
that.
from the COVID. Money the federal government gave to more local governments to deal with COVID. Just so people know, because sometimes they're
thank you, appreciate that.
What?
I got to be careful with the acronym, so appreciate the correction there.
Sorry.
But that money is running out, and we've spent millions on that each year. So fiscal year 25, I think there's going to be some really tough decisions, a lot of pain that's going to take place with prioritizing what our needs are over our wants. So definitely I look to go on council and be part of that conversation.
So that's budgeting is going to be a real priority.
Housing, number 2. I touched on it a little bit. Vacancy rates being so low right now compared to what market norm is, typically around 5 to 8%. And right now we're hovering right south of 2%, which is, pretty short term.
Better than the 0.05.
But yeah, it is improving somewhat. And there is some construction going out there, but we need to maintain that. That's definitely a sustain we need to do to keep supply up. We have different tools available in our toolbox to do that, and we need to avail ourselves to all those tools. I mean, we have something called community development finance institutions. There's a couple of them here in Missoula. There's one through NeighborWorks Montana. I believe that's involved in that as well, to help do bridge financing for low-income projects. We're talking around 70% area median income type projects to bring those in the community. We've also had some success with local limited equity home kind of neighborhoods put together. Wolf Street's a recent example up out there, that
yeah.
neighborhood there, where they're able to pull in to buy that property and have a limited equity share in that property. I think, there's room for projects like that. I think you're going to see more in that. We have to look at innovation in housing. Certainly
Some
that's
are
part of the
different,
conversation.
right? Like North Missoula Community Development Corporation has a project just across the street here by the library in which people buy the homes but not the land underlying it. And so that gets turned to the next generation of home buyers. So some way to make those houses more affordable.
It makes them affordable now, but it also makes them affordable for the future.
Yeah.
Those programs. So that's a great innovation that I think we need to sustain here in Missoula. I also look to low-income housing tax credits from the state, Montana Board of Housing. The 9% subsidy loan that they provide is the gold standard for us, LIDIC loans as they're called. Bringing those in for larger rental development in city is something I would look to sustain with the state. The other thing I mentioned too is, given my experience in land use planning, development review and whatnot, I have been endorsed by the Missoula Organization of Realtors here recently. And I know there's been some discussion about that recently
Right,
with
it's got a little
some PAC
controversy
money and
people
stuff
may
with
or may not know
another
about,
candidate. I'll just put it out there. They've given me the max donation, which is $400.
Yeah.
$400 is max donation. That's what they've given me. You can go to Commissioner of Political Practice's website for the state of Montana, and you can see, you can enter a name, enter a contributor, and see who's been contributing money for each candidate and how much they've been contributing. Also, it also tracks expenditures, how much I spend on my campaign and what I spend it towards, right to the penny. It's state law.
Yeah.
And I do those reports monthly. Actually, now I do them every couple days when I get a donation or spend money.
Oh, good. At least there's something's coming in. And
Yeah,
going out.
so
That's
they like
good
to keep
news.
track of that stuff. But, what I would tell people is go to the website, check out what they're about, look at their mission statement. I mean, they have housing supply and housing affordability in the best interest of the Missoula community, I believe. Go to their site. You could actually go to the advocacy section of their site. And
this is Missoula Organization of Realtors and
correct.
more. Yeah.
Go to advocacy, and you can look at a questionnaire that every candidate who's filing for office right now, all the mayoral candidates as well as all the city council candidates, and look at our answers to those questions. They gave us some pretty interesting questions, not just related to housing, but how we feel about TIF financing, how we feel about the city's non-discrimination ordinance, how we feel about taxation, about the local option tax.
Oh, interesting.
I have an answer, and it's in
we
that questionnaire.
Dear viewers, you had TIF in there, which is tax increment financing, related to MRA, which is Missoula Redevelopment Agency.
Correct. Thank you for that.
Oh, you bet.
And so all those questions together, click on our answer. You could look and see it's all there in writing. You'd see how what our responses were to those questions. And it's just better engagement for the community.
Great resource.
So
Thanks
I
for
would
telling
encourage
people that.
folks to check that out.
I think we did two priorities, budgeting and housing. Would you like a third? Infrastructure. And you mentioned getting state money for bridge rehabilitation and other infrastructure.
Well, what I would say is, so people ask my opinion, for instance, TIF, tax increment financing. What's my take on it? I believe there is a role for TIF in local government. I think we have to be careful with it, however. I think there's a role for using it within our urban renewal districts here in town, where we've identified areas of blight, and use it for purposes of remediating blight. That's what TIF, that's the college definition of TIF, is to remediate blight and to use it for that purpose. I'm not sure using it for Stockman Bank. I'm not sure using it for Southgate Mall for Westview Partners down there was the best use of TIF money, but certainly anytime we could use TIF within those urban renewal districts for what I call horizontal infrastructure, the sidewalks, the power lines,
that
the
everyone
utilities
supposedly
underground,
enjoys.
that everyone enjoys, set that up. That's something I could definitely look at. So infrastructure, absolutely.
And there seems to be new news that the Missoula Redevelopment Agency can also use money to address workforce housing, some other elements of the housing crisis rather than general amenities.
Sure. And what I would say to that is certainly on the horizontal infrastructure front, anything we do to subsidize, for infrastructure improvement on the ground, that's something I'd certainly entertain. But we have to be careful when we start getting into what I call vertical development, the brick and mortar, so to speak, because then we start dabbling down the road of, okay, first of all, if we're going to have a piece of land, what are the holding costs of that land to get, shovels in the ground? Interest rates are high. Those holding costs are going to exponentially increase as we hold the property before development. We have to look at the cost of productivity, the cost of actual construction materials and the boards and screws and everything else that goes to build it. And, those costs tend to increase. They have increased over the last 4 or 5 years. And that's something, I think we have an idea of, what something will cost now, but we have to be mindful of, once we start getting shovels in the ground and start developing, brick and mortar, what the ultimate cost is going to be. And that's cost that's burdened upon taxpayers through TIF financing and, defer those funds from things like schools and roads and police and fire and stuff.
The necessities. That phenomenon visited the library construction, as you might have guessed.
Yeah.
That they thought, the library costs X amount to build this beautiful new library we're in.
And it is
By
beautiful.
the time they got to build it, inflation had, raised the costs significantly. And that's where the partners of the library, did fundraising to make up that difference.
And that you bring up a good point, right? I think these private-public partnerships are going to be critical going forward because of things like inflation and interest rates and stuff. Absolutely.
Our third question, what did you learn on the campaign trail? And I don't know if you had enough time to knock on doors. A number of candidates said, well, it's only September.
Sure.
But you guys are in the
I
primary.
have a primary, so we had to
different.
get to it real early. Yes, we did. So I've been knocking doors, and first and foremost, we already discussed it, is the taxes. I mean, people have just, they're on their wits end with the taxes, and we're looking at 9.7% from the city again this year. We're looking at 5.5% roughly from the county. That's just another added burden and the last thing we want to do is create such a burden that now people have to leave their homes, have to move out of town, or, God forbid, now they're part of the homeless problem, which is another, critical problem here in town. But by and large, that's what I'm hearing across the board is just, the taxation and the ability to pay those property taxes every year and the increases in mortgage increases, the rents and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing that. And then secondarily, we have some subdivisions in Ward 5 that have caused some controversy. We have the, I believe it's called Riverfront Trail subdivision off Lower Miller Creek. I hear from those folks, and they're pretty upset with the roundabout that's going in there. And then there's a question of who's going to share what cost of that roundabout. I know council's tabled some of that discussion, but this is where I think it's critical. We're going through a new growth policy update. Through Community Development Planning and Innovation. Aaron Pian's working on that over there. It's important that we get that right. And I'd be, if I make council, by will of the voters, I hope to be part of that discussion, again, with my planning background, and have those discussions about setting up a growth policy and a plan that addresses, what the community's values, what the goals are from one ward to the next. The values we have up in Ward 1 aren't the same as Ward 5, and they're certainly not the same in Ward 2, which is, we're going to be seeing a lot of that outfill construction over, the next decade or so. So we need to have those conversations. We need to get the plan right. And, I think part of the symptoms we have there with that subdivision in Lower Middle Creek is, right off the bat that come in and, make an amendment to the growth policy. And I think those should be few and far between once we have a growth policy that, we spend years and, hundreds of thousands of dollars developing to get it right. That would be pretty difficult to make a change from that point forward.
To have exceptions after all this consideration.
After all that, to be making exception after exception, that can't really happen.
Gotcha. Well, here's your last question. And I think you've already told people quite a bit, but what do you want potential voters to know about you?
Yeah, I have touched quite a bit on that already. I would say this, I love, raising my children in the Missoula community. I brought 4, 3 from my first wife, and then we had one of our own. They're, of course, now out of the house, so we're empty nesters.
Right.
But, it was great, putting them through our schools, getting involved with our parks and recreation, Mount Sentinel baseball, youth hockey, YMCA, soccer, growing up and stuff. And just that tight sense of community that we have here and the vitality of the community, I think is really unique to Missoula as a whole. I travel to large cities, I travel to small towns. I got folks back east I visit from time to time in upstate New York and Pennsylvania, and I go to the downtowns and stuff, and it just lacks a certain something that Missoula has with vitality, with how warm folks are here in town. And I don't want us to lose that. I don't want us to lose that sense of identity going forward. And I look back at my career in law enforcement here, and as I say, I've seen some really great stuff from a lot of great people, not just cops or law enforcement, but our emergency services, our fire, or healthcare workers, folks in the local healthcare systems here. And I don't want us to lose that identity. So, I would say going forward, that's something I always have in the back of my mind, and something, if I'm, fortunate enough to be elected by my Ward 5 constituents, up in South Hills, Linda Vista area, Miller Creek, and what have you, to, make a difference on city council going forward.
Great. Well, Bob, thanks so much for taking the time to visit with us today.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you, dear viewer, for taking the time to learn about city council candidates. We've been visiting with Bob Campbell. He's a candidate for City Council Ward 5. I think Scott's put up the website you have, so you can learn more about Bob from the website. And Bob's also given us a great idea. You can go to the Missoula Organization of Realtors and see a Q&A with all the candidates there on their website. So we'll be interviewing more candidates in the future, and we'll see you at the next interview. For MCAT, I'm Joel Baird. Thanks for watching.